Hello and welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not.
This week, we're talking about Michael O'Donoghue.
Mr. Mike.
The original head writer and one of the strongest voices in the tone and comedic sensibilities of the first 5 seasons of Saturday Night Live.
I think a lot of people know season 3 marks the end of Michael O'Donoghue's tenure, at least original tenure on the show. He was the original head writer for the first 3 seasons. After season 3, he'll leave the show. He does come back for 2 very short stints later on in the show's life. But since this season marks the end of his main input into the show, we thought it would be a good time to reflect back and just talk about Michael O'Donoghue in general.
And we are very fortunate to have had on our show already as a guest, the man who literally wrote the book on Michael O'Donoghue.
Mr. Mike, the life and work of Michael O'Donoghue.
Dennis Perrin. Dennis, welcome back to the show.
What's up, buddy? Welcome back.
Hey, Gary. Hey, Brad. Happy to be here. Happy to chat away.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. We've been wanting to do this. Honestly, since the first time we talked, we were always like, at some point we got to get Dennis in here and just do a Michael O'Donoghue episode. So thanks.
Well, I'm proud to be linked to Michael, even after all this late time. You know, I mean, growing up, I was in high school when SNL. I think I've said this before. I was in high school, and I was a junior in high school when SNL premiered. So I literally grew up with the show, and the idea that not only would I get to know some of these people, both writers and a few cast members, but also I would get to know intimately Michael O'Donoghue, Mr. Mike. I mean, I never thought in a million years that would happen to me. And it did. It didn't fall in my lap. I made it happen. I was very ambitious about it. I pissed off several people who were much closer to him. They assumed they were going to get it. And I convinced Cheryl Hardwick, who you know was his wife and co-music director on SNL. And Cheryl picked me. She just goes, "Okay, you're it." I go, "Oh, good." And then I had a nervous breakdown when I left the apartment. I was like, "Oh man, now I gotta actually write this thing."
It's a big lift.
Well, you know, it was really anxiety producing. I mean, I was lucky in the sense that I knew Michael in the last 5 years of his life. I had coffee with him. I went to his dinner parties. We chatted on the phone many, many times. He even visited me once at an office where I was working. He just showed up and elegant as ever, theatrical as ever, comes in to this office, immediately lights a cigarette and starts blowing the smoke all around, looking around almost disdainfully at everything. And he goes, "Oh, hi, Dennis. Yeah. Am I late?" I go, "No." And then this coworker of mine goes, "He can't smoke in here. It's a non-smoking." I go, "Well, you go up and tell Michael O'Donoghue to put out that cigarette. This I got to see." And he looks at Michael. And remember, Michael's a tall guy. He's like 6'1". I mean, and he's really angular. And he's wearing a big fedora, you know. So and he doesn't have the dark glasses, but they're kind of smoky. You can see his eyes, but
yeah.
Anyway, and he just didn't give a fuck. You know, just like, I'm going to light this. I'm going to smoke. I said, "Well, just come into my personal office. I'll open the window." Yeah. I said, "Michael, I'm sorry about that." He goes, "Oh no, I'm sure it's a fire code thing." I go, It is, but we'll just suspend it for our meeting here." So, and then I interviewed him for the radio show I was working on. And also I used that to write the first article I wrote on Michael for a small political magazine called In These Times out of Chicago. And that was it. And Michael read that piece and we became fast friends. He trusted me. He said, not only did you get my jokes correct, you got them in the right order. He goes, "I can't tell you how rare that is."
Nice.
So I was brought into, as he was known on 17, The Presence. I was brought into The Presence. But he was really sweet with me. I never saw any of his temper tantrums. I never saw him get pissed off. Whenever I was around him, he was very sweet, soft-spoken, chain smoked, drank dark coffee. Yeah,
Nice.
It was pretty cool.
Well, let's go back in Michael's life and kind of start at the beginning with his life and his career prior to working on SNL. Where did Michael start out?
Well, he was born in upstate New York in 1940. Had rheumatic fever when he was like 3, was bedridden for like a year. which he began delving into Sherlock Holmes stories and actually joined a Sherlock Holmes fan club. In fact, I saw some of the correspondence he had from when he was a kid, because he saved everything. And he always said that period, the romantic fever period, is what colored his mind and his creative thoughts. And he adapted to that. And then, he went to high school, was a nerd, didn't get girls, and then went to University of Rochester, dropped out, moved to San Francisco to become a beatnik until the money ran out. And he had to borrow money from his father, who did not agree with his direction. So he came back to upstate New York, tried college one more time, didn't take, he didn't like it. And then he just did a bunch of menial jobs until his first professionally published piece in the Evergreen Review in 1964, I think, 64, 65. Called The Automation of Caprice. It was a bizarre one-act play. And I defy anyone to look that up and read it. It's in my book. I have sections of it, and tell me what it means, because I've read it many times and I have absolutely no idea what it's about. But the people at Evergreen Review loved it. And then he hooked up with Frank Springer, the illustrator, and they co-created Phoebe Zeitgeist. And that's what put him on the map. Because Michael says nobody reads text. They love comics. So I'm going to do comics.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it did. Phoebe Zeitgeist was the hit of the magazine. In fact, he claimed that Barbarella was a ripoff of Phoebe Zeitgeist, which if you look at it, it lines up a little bit. But and they were going to make a movie of it. First it was going to be animated, and then they couldn't get that going. And then they thought a live action, but then Barbarella came out, and how many space vixen movies can you do? I mean, I don't know, especially when you have Jane Fonda in one. So in any event, and he moved around the East Village, West Village, and was essentially a bohemian writer. And he performed at in the East Village at the Electric Circus. He had a stage act. It was on St. Mark's Place, and he had a stage act where, it was just an act. He basically either he read his poetry, or he would dismember dolls. He would take dolls up there and just take them apart and yell at them, yell at the heads, and and that was the birth of Michael O'Donoghue. And then eventually he met up with Henry Beard and Doug Kenny, who liked Lampoon. When the Lampoon started, and he was the first outside writer to come in. And he knew through the grapevine, through his friend George Trow, who he knew a little bit, but later came to know very, very well. But these guys from Harvard were looking for writers, and that they were fans of Phoebe Zeitgeist. It was the kind of humor they wanted to do. They wanted to do comics too. And so Michael walked in their offices and put down Harvard, said he hated it. He didn't trust anybody who went to an Ivy League school. And they hired him anyway.
That's how charming he was, that he just told them outright he didn't trust anyone like them. And they were like, we like this guy.
We like this guy. Let's put him on the masthead. And then the rest is history. He became a very prolific contributor. He helped he did start the National Lampoon Radio Hour.
Yeah.
He was the host and head writer of it until he quit the Lampoon, because he and Matty Simmons, the owner and publisher of the Lampoon, and Michael butted heads a lot. And Michael's distrust of authority obviously got in the way. And he felt that lesser talents like Tony Hendra, the late Tony Hendra, who I actually liked personally, but Michael didn't like him. But he felt that they were getting, like Tony Hendra had Lemmings, the stage show that with John Belushi and Chevy Chase and Christopher Guest. And he felt that he was being overlooked in favor of lesser talents. And so Maddie threw him a bone, said, well, we'll start a radio. They've been getting on us to do either a Lampoon TV show or a Lampoon radio show. He goes, I think radio show is easier to do, probably. And well, that's what he thought, but of course it didn't. It wasn't easy at all.
No. Because they had done the albums by then, right?
Radio Dinner, which Michael and Hendra co-produced. That's when they were still relatively friendly. You got to remember, Hendra was in awe of Michael. And Michael knew that and used it against him because, well, of course you're in awe of me. I'm a fucking genius. So yeah. And, but eventually they fell apart because of Hendra sleeping with one of Michael's ex-girlfriends. And when Michael found out about it, that was it. The iron door closed forever and they never talked again. Ever.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was all on Michael's side. So Michael could hold grudges like nobody's business.
Talk to us then about where Michael is 1975 and how he gets pulled in by Lauren to be on the show. He's
unemployed. He quit the Lampoon in 74 and had no backup plan. He had very little savings. He was at this point living with Ann Beats, and Ann was making all the money. She got him a restaurant reviewing job at the Village Voice. And he wrote, I think, 2 minor reviews. And then he went crazy on an editor who rewrote one of his sentences and he went nuts. And so he quit the Voice, which is really too bad because that's when the Village Voice was really good. I mean, they had some great writers on that staff. And Michael would have been a great addition. So anyway, so 75 and then, Lauren starts putting out feelers. And by this point, Michael and Ann became friendly with Marilyn Suzanne Miller, who was Michael's gateway to SNL. Even though Marilyn did not work on the first episode, she was actually living in Pittsburgh at the time, and she watched it. She had been offered a writing gig on the show by Lauren.
She's the one who told Lauren to go after O'Donoghue, right? She turned down Lauren's offer and said, you need to go talk to Michael O'Donoghue.
Right. And they hosted, Marilyn and Ann and Michael hosted a little dinner thing for Lauren at the Winter Palace, West 16th Street, 23 West 16th Street in Chelsea neighborhood of New York City, apartment 1, and beautiful pre-war floor through with columns and just wide open. And they charmed the pants off Lauren and he hired them as a team.
Is that the dinner that they served Danish food? Is that what Marilyn?
Yeah.
Marilyn told us this story.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one. And she said, I think she probably told you, she goes, I didn't know anybody who ate or served Danish food. I'd never done that before in my life.
Exactly what she told us.
Yeah. But Marilyn was the conduit. She's the one who brought them together. And of course, Michael needed the work. Well, both he and Ann needed the work. Ann was making a decent living as a freelance writer and editor. And she was the one bringing in the money. And she was a little wary of television. Michael's like, I'm in. No problem.
Right. Because he just needed a job at that point.
Well, he needed a job. And he told me TV is hot. Print is cold. TV is hot. And I wanted to work in a hot medium. So that's how Michael got on the show. And he rose to great heights almost immediately.
And was Michael brought on as head writer right away? Or was he just a writer? And then as it evolved, because the season 1, he and Lauren are co-head writers. Yeah.
Right. And Chevy. Chevy also, there was no head writer like they later did with Jim Downey, but in terms of the office dynamics, in terms of the comedy being written, Michael was definitely one of the top 2 or 3. Chevy was the other one, and Lauren. It was the 3 of them really. And Michael just took right to it. I mean, he was given keys to the kingdom. And he acted like he belonged, I mean, he convinced Lauren to do Wolverines, and Lauren was a little wary of it because he didn't really understand it. Because I don't know what he goes. No, it's short. It's brief, but it's punchy. We John and I end up dead at the end of it, and It won't be like any other comedy you'll see on any other TV show. I promise you that. Lorne had to be convinced of a lot of things with Michael, because Lorne was actually kind of conservative in a lot of ways. He was a seasoned TV producer, and while he worked with Lily Tomlin and people like that, he also worked with Phyllis Diller. So he knew the business from the production side, and so he was a little wary of having these uncontrollable personalities, creatives like Belushi and O'Donoghue. Chevy he trusted almost immediately, because Chevy got it too. Chevy had broadcast experience. He wrote for the Smothers Brothers. He did some PBS stuff. So, and he had been in movies like The Groove Tube.
Right.
And so he was seasoned. Michael was seasoned too, but Michael didn't appear on camera until he got on SNL. He was on mic at the radio hour, but you didn't see him.
So, well, let's talk about that a little bit, right? Because Michael, like you said, starts out on camera in the first sketch. He's a player in the first few episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's credited as a cast member to start the show.
Yeah.
And juxtaposed to that, Chevy was not supposed to be a cast member at the beginning, right? So, Can you just talk us through how that worked? How Michael's role as a cast member kind of went away, and he became solely a writer?
Well, I think the cast was too big. I think the network, because you got to also remember, Lorne wanted to bring in Bill Murray in the first season. And, the network says, we only have a budget for this many people. And I think Michael was already making money as a writer. I don't know I'm sure he got paid because he had to be on camera. So he had to join after him. I'm sure of it. And he just, he became the power behind the throne. I think he preferred that. And he did appear, even though he was credited as a cast member, I think for the first couple of shows, he would show up in cameos afterwards. He'd be like, or he'd just be an extra.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of sketches you see, he's like sitting at a table, like ordering wine or something, or smoking a cigarette. He doesn't have any lines, but it's him.
Right.
And usually paired with Ann, but somebody, or Tom Davis. So Mike, and then of course, by the second season and the show's a hit, and, Michael did the Needles in the Eyes, which went over very, very well the first time, because no one had ever seen anything like that before. Of course, Michael ran it into the ground, but once it was a hit, then Michael's role expanded behind the scenes. And that's, then he got the dark glasses and he created the Mr. Mike character. And then he just became that character. When you saw him on camera from that point on, he was Mr. Mike. He wasn't Michael O'Donoghue.
Right.
Let's talk about the first season a little bit, because I think it gets overlooked. You did just mention it. We've said this a bunch of times on our show. We've attributed 4 people that are really responsible for SNL literally surviving season 1 and becoming the show it was. And they all win Emmys the first season. Lorne, obviously. Chevy Chase, of course, the breakout star. Davey Wilson, director. And Michael, the head writer, who won. And it really was, as you just mentioned, right, Lorne, Michael, and Chevy, who kind of steered that ship all through season 1, like including things like setting the tone, establishing what this show is going to actually be. The 3 of them, there's the infamous story of over the winter break that Lorne wasn't happy at the Christmas episode, and the 3 of them like spent the entire hiatus just writing and coming up with new material. But I just want to see, talk a little bit maybe about how important that first season was and how vital he was to creating that vibe and feel.
It's interesting. The first season is kind of miraculous in a lot of ways. I mean, that sensibility was eventually going to get on TV because primarily because of the National Lampoon, but also because there were more and more people from Second City entering the business. So you had these alternative outlets for comedy becoming mainstream, or at least entering the mainstream. And they altered it. And as you know, I'm not telling any tales out of school, the first season, especially the first half of the first season, was very experimental because they didn't really know what the format was truly going to be. And the idea was that, it would be an evolving format, that, it's not going to be, the only thing that would stick would be Weekend Update, because that was like the center point. It's like, it's the anchor for the show. You knew that was going to come on, but the rest of it could have been anything. Then, of course, once you had the breakout characters, samurai, bees, then it did what TV does. It repeats itself. And while it's still an interesting show, an experimental show, by the end of the first season, you could tell, and this includes the 2 summer shows they had with Louise Lasser and Chris Christopherson, you could tell that they have settled into this format now. This is going to be the format. And it's more or less the same format they use now. I say more or less, but I don't think it was as rigid as the current format is, but it's but they settled on it. I think Lauren insisted on, let's have like some normalcy here. And I think Michael saw that as the writing on the wall for him, because up till that point, he was allowed to do pretty much anything he wanted. But now he's getting stuff rejected, or, which did not please him at all. And, or having his piece in dress but not make air. So it was very frustrating for him. But he stuck it out. As we know, he lasted 3 seasons. I'm amazed he lasted that long, to be quite honest with you. But if he had left after the first season, it wouldn't have surprised me. But he didn't. He hung in there, and again, Lauren, I wouldn't say coddled him, but certainly made him feel special. Although less and less so as Lauren's power rose, and the show's influence spread, and the format became more solidified. Michael's style of humor became less and less attracted to Lauren, because now you got all these breakout stars. You wanted you cleaned up at the Emmys. You're the alternative to Carol Burnett. You're the hip alternative to Carol Burnett, and people are watching. The audience is increasing show by show by show, and it was the talk of television. So obviously, Michael came back in the second season with, and I wrote about this in my book a little bit, with all these bizarre concepts for the second season, none of which got used. So, the circus kind of left town for him. He's still like chasing after the wagons. It's just, he still got on. Like I said, once he realized if he had a recurring character, he would get more airtime. And so that's where Mr. Mike came from. Instead of just being Michael O'Donoghue in this sketch, or this, dark glasses, dark suit, cigarette, dark tone, and boom, and the name Mr. Mike. Then he became. It's like I pointed out. He became so enmeshed in that character. He might as well wore bee antenna. He was that kind of recurring character.
Well, in that first season, his to go back to that first season, his fingerprints are just all over it. If it's not sketches he specifically wrote, I remember you wrote about this in the book, young writers like Zweibel and Franken and Davis, even their pieces are like very, you can tell O'Donoghue influenced. His fingerprints are all, even stuff, we mentioned the when they did the Lily Tomlin song with the all nurse band, and like it was O'Donoghue's idea to have the band dress up as nurses. Like, even not what everybody thinks of as the dark O'Donoghue humor. He's everywhere in that first season, getting his vibe and his vision out to people.
Well, Michael wasn't just a dark satirist, although he certainly was that, but he had a real absurd, silly side too. And that gets overlooked. Like the nurses thing you just mentioned. He did that kind of stuff all the time. He played around, and he might not even write something down, like a read through. He might say, it would be great if we added this, or we did this. He wouldn't even be submitted on paper. And Lauren would go, oh yeah, that's not a bad idea. Let's put that in, So yeah, he's, and again, he thought that the show would revolve around him. I don't know, forever, but more than it did, longer than it did.
It makes sense after that first season. Some of the sketches he wrote, Godfather Therapy, Last Voyage of the Starship Enterprise, Citizen Kane 2, which is an amazing sketch at the time, and just in general, it's like, all just top notch. The Norman Bates Hotel Management's a great, quick little one-off thing that's so funny.
Yeah, Citizen Kane 2 was Davey Wilson really did not like that sketch because, first of all, he didn't want it in black and white. And Michael insisted on it. He says, we're doing a parody of Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane was not in color. Right. The parody has to look like the original or you're just losing it. And that he insisted on that. And Lorne sided with him. Said, yeah, no, we're going to do it in black and white. And Davey Wilson goes, do you know how hard it is to light black and white on live television? He goes, well, that's your job, man. That's why I hired you. You figure it out. And you're right. It's an amazing sketch. It doesn't get a lot of laughs, but it has such a cool look to it. And the fact that they were doing a parody of an Orson Welles classic, I mean.
Mm-hmm. Right. A 30 whatever year old film at that point. And they pull it off in the way that you know what they're doing. And it still resonates with people who have seen Citizen Kane. I mean, even today you watch it and you're like, oh yeah, that's really good.
And it ends on a really silly joke, about roast beef on rye with mustard, and
right.
But they tried to make it sound like, it was like this big grand statement. And he just wanted a sandwich. He wanted a deli sandwich. That's basically it.
And they did that a bunch season 1. I mean, that's how Land Shark started. It was Jaws 2. Like SNL was making goofy sequels to movies that you never thought would have sequels. Jaws 2, Citizen Kane 2, Exorcist 2 with the Richard Pryor episode of Michael. They're doing all these like really smart things that he's responsible for. It's like that season 1, when you look at it and dissect it, there's just so much good stuff in there.
Oh yeah. And again, it was experimental. I mean, they were just seeing what would stick. And like I said before, Update was the anchor of the show in terms of format. And of course, the music guests and then ultimately the hosts. But it was, they tried a lot of different things. And Michael had a huge influence on that. Like you said, Brad, his fingerprints were all over it. And Chevy's.
One of the things that I think kind of stands out in season 1, especially, is Michael's sketches that are most of the time just like one person, one performer, a lot of times Lorraine in these dark sketches. Was there a reason he wrote for Lorraine specifically? Did she get his humor, or did it work best with her?
No, Lorraine really dug Michael's humor a lot. She had a very dark sensibility of her own. And when you really think about it, the 3 women, I mean, Jane isn't really fit for, even though she did the Squeaky Fromm sketch with Lorraine, human hair potholders. I'm sorry. That still makes me laugh.
It's funny.
And again, doing comedy on national television about Charles Manson followers who shave their heads and make potholders out of their hair. That's Michael. In any event, but Jane really didn't fit what he was doing. And Gilda, of course not. I mean, Gilda was very light and bouncy and jubilant and fun. So it really just came down to Lorraine. And Lorraine was more than willing to go there. And she'll tell you that to this day. She reveres Michael in his memory. And Michael had no problem. He would write for just about anybody on the show if he could get it on the air. But as things settled down, Lorraine became his choice of the women.
So then in season 2, we start to see this kind of shift in the tone of the show. Like you said, it becomes a little more formulaic, and they're starting to kind of lay the groundwork for what the show would become. Mm-hmm. And Michael's greater influence, I think, on the writer's room starts to wane at this point, right?
Mm-hmm. The younger writers are starting to get confident. I mean, they know they're part of something special, and they start getting material. I mean, Franken and Davis are the best example of that. I mean, they barely got hired, but once they began to establish their voice, collective voice, that boosted their confidence, and especially Al Franken's, which didn't need much boosting, but Tom's too. I mean, Tom is those two guys are so different. How they pulled off. I'm a big Franken and Davis fan from the original show. I love the Franken and Davis show. And again, a lot of dark humor about brain tumors, and death, and I mean, where do you think that came from? So,
oh yeah, you still see again, those fingerprints of Michael's on the humor from the younger writers in season 2. You just see fewer of Michael's sketches. I mean, you see Mr. Mike more, but you see fewer of those, like I was thinking of the flight attendant sketch with Lorraine. Some things like that you see less of starting in season 2. And so was he starting to feel that, that push?
Yeah.
I can only assume for him it was like inner anger and turmoil that he's not getting as much on air.
Well, again, like we've established, once he came up with the character Mr. Mike, that's pretty much what he relied on throughout the rest of his stay. I mean, he would get on other sketches, but less and less so. And he found that Mr. Mike would get airtime, so that's where he put all of his efforts. But again, it became like almost a one joke character. Still sinister. I loved it. When I first saw it, it was fantastic. Again, you didn't see this on Carol Burnett or Soupy Sales or any of these other shows at the time. But yeah, he knew that his influence was waning. He knew it. Instead of finding his niche and just staying there, or working out a deal with Lauren, like, give me just one sketch a week. Just let me do whatever I want, and unless standards or the censors say no, let's get it on, but he didn't do that. He still wanted to be treated like royalty, and he wasn't. Again, Lauren turned away from that. He kept him on there, and Lauren loved Michael. In fact, at Michael's wake, Lauren almost was in tears talking about him. When everybody got up to their testimonials, Lauren got up and talked about how much he loved him and how much Michael meant to the show. He goes, I don't think the show would have made it without him, because he just gave us that instant credibility, that satirical credibility from the get-go.
I think the key word there, Mike, is almost. He was almost in tears.
Yeah,
because
he held together.
Yeah.
Chevy cried.
Well, they had an interesting relationship, right? I mean, Michael and Chevy worked together prior to SNL, and they had a long history together.
Well, they worked on the radio hour together and on Radio Dinner, I believe, and so he knew Chevy before SNL, and they were very friendly together. And Michael, they were in the back of a cab once. And Chevy told me, he goes, Michael said to me, Chevy, you're going to make a really good, mediocre movie star. And Chevy goes, and Michael was right.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened. So, and the other thing about Chevy's pride was always in the way at times, but Michael could get away with murder with Chevy. He could openly insult him. And he would laugh. Chevy considered it an honor. He goes, because if Michael wasn't if Michael didn't like you, you got the cold shoulder. He wouldn't even make eye contact with you. But if he's insulting you,
we'll talk about it later. I'm sure we'll talk about it later. But there's the instance when Chevy comes back, when Michael comes back, and Chevy does like the non-host, or when Chevy comes back to host, and O'Donohue writes a monologue where Chevy just like rips his own career that never went to air, right? Didn't like when Chevy came back and O'Donohue was writing for the show in one of the later stints, he wrote this like scathing Chevy, and Chevy loved it and wanted to do it. And like it was,
that was
they didn't want to put it on.
That was in '85, the giant garden slug.
Yeah. And like Lauren nixed it and didn't want to put it on.
No, well, I don't even think it was totally Lauren's decision. I think it was the standards. I don't think. I mean, he submitted the script. I have a copy of the script. It was submitted. Yeah, and Chevy loved it, and he went to Lauren and goes, "I want to do this. It's my monologue." He goes, "Well, first of all, Chevy, you can't be talking about cramming $20 bills up your ass. I mean, that's just not going to pass, Because there's that line in there. It goes, "I am Chevy Chase. Have you noticed in the years since I left Saturday Night Live, my eyes have gotten smaller and closer together, and I've become a giant garden slug." Now, if anybody else had written that to Chevy, he'd probably like hit him with a chair, Right. But he was like, "Oh God, this is perfect. I want to do this." I can only imagine that would have been an interesting moment in the show's history if that had gotten on. But
we were talking about, the kind of the change in power of Michael decreasing and the other writers getting more power. Would you say, is it safe to say that change really took place between seasons 2 and 3? Because season 2, Michael's still writing. I don't think he's really he was doing Least Loved Bedtime Stories, but he hadn't devolved, for lack of a better word, into the Mr. Mike persona of like cameos and sketches on Mr. Mike. I mean, he's still writing fun stuff like Gary Gilmore and the Lucy Conveyor Belt, and he's Least Loved Bedtime Stories. It feels like somewhere after 2 into 3 is when he really made that change.
Well, it's funny. He did an interview between seasons 2 and 3 for some local, I think it was like a Long Island newspaper. And he had big plans for season 3. Mm-hmm. He says, I got all these great ideas and we're coming back in the fall. And yeah, he really thought he was going to, as he put it, ride this one to shore. But yeah, again, Lauren had different ideas and Michael stuff started not getting on and the frustration built. And even Mr. Mike sort of faded. I mean, Mr. Mike was on a lot in season 2 at the character, much more than season 3. I mean, he came on a few times but again, Lauren was kind of turning away from that. And he kept Michael around because he thought the show needed him. He thought it's that Michael was still vital, just not, he wasn't the vital one anymore. There were other vital voices now emerging and taking charge. And if Michael had just accepted that, he might have lasted through the whole first 5 years, maybe, at least through season 4. But no, he had to get, Michael's a drama queen. And anything that pissed him off, I mean, he would just get volcanic with his anger. And Lauren got to the point where he's like, I don't want to be around this anymore, this energy. I love Michael, but I just, he's disruptive. And he was. And he even admitted that years later. He goes, I tried to disrupt the show, knock it off the rails. So, yeah. And Lauren takes a lot of shit for a lot of things. And I think in a lot of cases it's deserved. But he really was loyal to Michael far longer than any other producer would be, especially Dick Ebersol. Dick Ebersol didn't even last a full season with him. And Michael knew that about Lauren. Michael loved Lauren too. I mean, they had a very close relationship. And so, but I think Lauren was correct in trying to get away from that because, you have newer writers like Brian Doyle Murray coming in. And then, of course, Brian McConaughey came in later and Don DeVello. I mean, especially Don DeVello. I mean, he established himself really, not just with Guido Sarducci, but the sketches that he wrote, Olympia Diner, stuff like that. And the sensibility of the humor was getting more conceptual and subtler. And Michael's stuff was like, a sledgehammer to the face. Which in the first season is great because you want to get the attention of the audience. Like, boom, look at this, and boom, look at that. But now the audience is mainstreaming. The show is becoming more and more accepted across the spectrum. And, the sledgehammer to the face just isn't going to work anymore. And especially when Jim Downey came on the show and began establishing his voice, more ethereal, brainy, conceptual comedy, softer, if you would. I would call it softer comedy. I mean, I think Jim Downey's probably one of the greatest writers in the show's history and wrote some fantastic stuff, especially early on, the first 5 seasons. Well, he came in season 2, but yeah. But see, Lauren gravitated to that kind of voice, obviously, because Downey was with the show forever. So, so Michael's, and again, if Michael had just kept his head down, did his work, accepted his place, he would have lasted longer. But that's just not how Michael was. Either love me or kill me. That's it.
Right. So then let's talk about his leaving the show this first time. How did that come to be? How did Michael feel about it? What was Lauren's position? What happened at the end of season 3?
Well, it's interesting. Michael later, again, the drama queen that he was, he made this big deal about how he told Lorne Michaels to fuck off and, fuck you and fuck your show. And, and I don't need this crap anymore, blah, blah, blah. But the last show of the third season, Michael's on. He sings Baby Ghouls. He's got the spotlight to himself and a soft focus, and he's singing a song with Lorraine, again, playing a dead girl, doing sign language. And if you watch the good nights of the last show of the third season, Michael's on home base, waving to the audience. So if he told Lorne to fuck off, it had to happen after that, because it didn't happen during the week. Definitely not. I mean, Michael looked like he was happy to be there. But then he started getting offers for other things, and that's how Mondo Video came about. Because, and again, Lorne got him that gig. He goes, no, you want to keep O'Donohue. I can't keep him on the show, but NBC should do something with him. And they concocted a series of specials that Michael would write and produce and star in. And only one was produced, and it never aired. So, which we know is Mondo Video.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that season 3 finale and how happy Michael was. What was his relationship with Buck Henry? Because I feel like a lot of Michael's best stuff came out on Buck episodes. Like that's when he did the Needle in the Eyes for the first time with Buck hosting. He brought it back with Buck hosting.
He always did it with Buck. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, he did it with Buck. And then he didn't, we were saying he didn't have a lot of sketches in season 3 per se that were his, but like one of the big ones is the Mr. Mike's Ricky Rat Club, which is Buck Henry. Mm-hmm. I'm like, was there a special thing between the two of them, or just happened to be?
They weren't close friends or anything. Buck Henry told me when I interviewed him that he was afraid to become friends with Michael because he could see that if he crossed him, so he just said, I don't want any of that noise. He said, I respected Michael. I liked him, but I kept him at an arm's length, Mm. And he said also Michael had other bigger fish to fry than, being friends with me. So, and Buck was just happy to be there. He would do sketches that other hosts rejected. He goes, I'll do it.
Or maybe maybe Buck just is the one who would say yes to Michael's stuff.
Exactly. So, but I know he respected, and Michael respected Buck. He did. But again, he wasn't looking for showbiz friendships, at least not in that area. But they got on fine.
So then after he leaves the show in summer of 1978, does the Mondo Video stuff, but what else is Michael doing at this point after?
Well, he worked on a screenplay called War of the Insect Gods. He also wrote a screenplay with Chevy called Saturday Matinee, of which War of the Insect Gods was going to be a movie within the movie. And then Saturday Matinee was going to be sort of a sketch-oriented movie, like, a Kentucky Fried Movie or something like that. That was the idea, only darker. And Chevy was going to star in it, and Chevy and Michael co-wrote it. And I have a copy of the script. It's really interesting, actually. And it had trailers, it had animation, it had a movie within a movie, and that kind of thing. So it was very Kentucky Fried Movie oriented, which at the time was very popular. But it just fell apart for whatever reason. And, then he thought, well, I could take the movie within Saturday Matinee, War of the Insect Gods, and make that a movie. And he went, I think it was Paul Klein of the network, and tried to sell him on it. And he pitched it about giant cockroaches taking over Manhattan. And, NBC were just like, no, I don't think so. Because he thought, well, at least I could sell it to NBC. It may not make it as a movie, as a theatrical release, but right. And he didn't get that on either. So he was very frustrated. And then Mondo Video came along, which again was his idea, and he worked with the same writers as he worked with on War of the Insect Gods. His old friend Emily Prager, and another ex-Lampoon writer, Dirk Wittenborn, who was a short story writer, wrote for the New Yorker, and then Mitch Glazer, who became Michael's best friend. So again, Lorne sold Montevideo to NBC, said he would executive produce it. He put his name on it, and that it would air on a night on a Saturday night that the show was on hiatus.
Yeah, off week, right? Yeah.
So, of course, he makes it, and they show it to the network, and well, Nazi oven mitts. That was one. It's a very brief visual gag. It's on a refrigerator with swastikas on these oven mitts. He goes, next I'm on the video, Nazi oven mitts. Now, the NBC censor's like, we can't put this on. Nazi oven mitts. And then, of course, there was throwing cats into a swimming pool, the cat swimming school.
After that, he does make a return to SNL before the infamous Dick Ebersol period when he comes back and cameos on the 100th episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
he's in the cold open, which I thought was great. If you're going to do you had to bring him back for that at the very least.
Yeah. Him and John came back for that, right?
And he'd come back and do Needles in the Eyes. Although by this point, everyone's seen it. And it would be like he graduated from Mike Douglas to Tony Orlando to Elvis Presley. And I think the last time he did it, it was, I think, the last show of the 4th season. And again, Buck was the host. And Michael came out as celebrity impressionist Michael O'Donoghue. And it was Elvis Presley, Needles in the Eyes for Elvis Presley. Same bit, just different celebrities. The exact same bit.
I love how they always introed him as impressionist. Impressionist
Michael O'Donoghue. Right. And he'd come out, he goes, as a top impressionist, I'm often asked. So his connection remained with the show because of Lorne, because Lorne still loved him. He just didn't want him there on a daily basis, basically. Every once in a while, open a spot for Michael, give him his 3 minutes or whatever, and you're done. You get to go back to your successful show.
And then he eventually, a few seasons later, Dick Ebersol now is running the show, and he comes back, right? Was that season 6 or 7?
It's the end of season 6. Mm-hmm. Gene Domanian's been deposed.
And everything you've been saying, Dennis, that's very Lorne-centric, too, on him coming back.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
He didn't just just show up on 17 and goes, I'm back,
Yeah.
And Ebersol never really got him or really liked him all that much. Didn't like his humor at all. But he knew that if he had O'Donoghue on his staff, that it would give instant credibility to the new show. And he was looking for that because you have Michael O'Donoghue, he's the original SNL, we're trying to salvage this show. And who better to bring on than Mr. Mike? And
didn't bringing Michael back, bring some of the other people back from the original era?
Marilyn came back. So Rosie
it wasn't just him. Yeah.
Oh, he brought his people along. Yeah. So he tried to get the Mondo writers jobs under Ebersol, but that didn't work out. But yeah, Michael did everything he could to bring people along with him because he needed people he could trust. Yeah, especially with this new cast. He hated Joe Piscopo. Just absolutely did not like him at all. Couldn't understand why he was popular. Just didn't get him. In fact, he liked Mary Gross personally, but didn't think she was very talented. And once said to her that she shouldn't be in show business. She should be selling shoes. That's what she was good at.
And this was someone he liked personally. So
he liked Mary. Yeah, he did. He just didn't think she was talented.
Yeah.
And she shouldn't be on the show. So now Eddie, obviously, come on. Even Michael couldn't put him down. So, and Michael knew it. This guy is the linchpin.
Do you want to tell the Catherine O'Hara danger on the wall story?
Yeah. Now
we have Michael O'Donoghue to thank for Catherine not being a cast member.
And I participated in mythologizing that meeting. Because everybody I talked to, Barry Blaustein, Emily, they all told the same story. So I figured, well, it must be true then, because everybody's telling the same story. So I wrote it up as they told it. Catherine said she'd do it. She had taken a break from SCTV. She needed a job. It seems a natural fit, but SCTV's in creative environment and a Michael O'Donoghue run show are two completely different things. And Catherine was not terribly keen on some of the scripts she was reading. The Danger on the Wall thing, he did do that. He ran out of spray paint in the middle of Danger. So he had to call for an assistant to bring in a new can of spray paint. And everyone's just sitting there, and they all know what word he's spray painting. But he won't say a word until he puts it up there. Then he goes, "This is what the show is missing." And
how is that not a sketch? How does that not become a sketch?
I know, right? But I just like he's just there smoking a cigarette, waiting for a new can of spray paint. So, so Catherine, I don't think she was offended so much as she just felt it wasn't a good fit for her. I know it was like, oh, and then she later just kind of says, I was not offended at all. Didn't offend me. I just didn't think it was a fit. I didn't think it would be a good fit. I didn't like the scripts they were putting out. I just, and then eventually she went, and then when SCTV went to network, she came back, which was a much better fit. And she trusted those people. I mean, they were like family to her.
And this was the return, Michael Howard. He was calling it the Viking Death Ship. Right?
Yep.
Is that what it was when he came? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And he wanted to be called Reich Marshal O'Donoghue. And also on his office door, he spray painted a skull and crossbones on the front of his door. So he really, again, drama queen, he really played it up big. And he thought he was going to get to run the show. He thought, well, Ebersol doesn't know shit about comedy. I do. He's not Lorne. Lorne would never let me actually run the show. But Ebersol might. Ebersol just wants to keep it together and keep the checks flowing. He just, he's an executive. He realizes how important the show is to the network. And so he was brought in there to salvage it, which he did ultimately. But Michael had different plans in mind. He came in and just said, we need to bury this show. We need to sink it. We need to set it on fire. The Viking Death Ship. Once the smoke cleared, so to speak, that's when Ebersol thought, it's either him or me. And guess who's going to go? So
yeah, they do the one episode at the end of season 6.
Yeah,
season 6 is over. They come back for 7. Michael's head writer, and he lasts 7, 8 episodes,
something like that. I think he made it to the Christmas break. And that was it. Yeah, but he got a lot of stuff. The last show he was on, he and Nelson Lyon and Terry Southern got on At Home with the Psychos with Bill Murray.
Yeah, right.
And that was the last thing he wrote.
That and the infamous Fred Silverman sketch that
which never got on,
made it to air. Yeah, never made it to air.
I have that script, and I'm telling you, I could see why they never aired it. And the cover story is that Fred Silverman wouldn't allow it because it made fun of him. But to be honest with you, technically, it would have been a nightmare. It would have been anywhere from an 18-minute to 20-minute sketch with no break for commercial. It'd be a mix of live performance and pre-tape, and you had actors who were playing multiple roles in the sketch. So they would leave the set, put on a wig, come back in, play somebody else. It would have been a logistics nightmare. I could see why they didn't do it. I mean, especially at that time. I don't know if they could pull it off. It would have been, if they ever did air it, it would have been, I think, one of the great misfires in the show's history. I mean, you talk about swinging for the fences.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then again, of course, Michael went to the press. When Ebersol told, and NBC, Fred Silverman, they told him there was no way this is getting on the air. Just stop submitting it, And of course, Michael couldn't take the loss, so he had to go to the press and complain about the corporate censorship and the jackals that were feeding on him at SNL, and his original vision was being compromised, and so on and so on. And they ate it up. I mean, Daily News, New York Post, even the New York Times wrote about it.
And then that was the end of his second tenure at SNL.
Right.
Yeah. But not his last.
No.
Right? He comes back 4 years later, right?
1985.
Yeah.
When Lorne returns.
Lorne returns and he brings Michael back. And what was the deal that they had set up for this season?
Michael was going to make short films a la Schiller Vision or Albert Brooks, that kind of thing. He wasn't going to write live sketches. He was going to write short films and star in them himself. He'd play Mr. Mike, identifiable character.
Right.
And I have some scripts. They're not really scripts. They're more treatments for some of the short movies that he had. And it would have been interesting. They're not terribly funny, but, and of course, Lorne saw some of these and just said, this is not the direction I want to go in. Again, although he gave Michael a job because Michael was complaining to Bernie Brillstein, I got to pay my rent. Of course, Michael could afford to pay his rent. It's just he wanted to live extravagantly, and TV paid him really, really well. So he took the gig.
Yeah.
But he did not. Yeah, I don't even know if he even showed up for table reads. He said that Lorne had guaranteed him his little spot, the one I was talking about before. If he just done his little section, he could have ridden it much longer than he did.
Right.
And then he was let go. The New York Times did a piece about mid-season talking about the troubles at the new Saturday Night Live and how the ratings were in the toilet. Critical reaction was largely negative. The sketches were seen as really bad, and a lot of them were. The cast didn't gel at all. And of course, New York Times goes to Michael O'Donoghue to get his take on the 85-86 season. And predictably, Michael tore the show apart in the New York Times.
Yeah.
Which Lorne went crazy. And especially Michael's quote was, "When I watch the show, it reminds me of watching old men die." He goes, "It's witless, it's gutless." And then he acts surprised when he got fired the following Monday. You're out. And that was it for Michael. And I think that was really it. I mean, the next time he appeared is when he died. Dennis Miller did a brief bit on Update, showing Michael holding a switchblade.
I was going to ask because, we've mentioned all these other times he's left the show, but he's always kind of had the connection. Lorne's been there for him. But after this time, you never see him. He has really, other than his marriage, there's no real connection he has to the show ever after that.
Right. Well, and because of his marriage, he would hang out with hosts, not in the studio or on 17, but socially. He went out to dinner. He and Cheryl went out to dinner with Roseanne Barr. And in fact, Roseanne mentions after one of her good nights, said, "Michael O'Donoghue told me not to say this cast is great. These kids are great. I've had a fabulous week." Goes, "But I'm going to say it anyway. Sorry, Michael." So Michael got at least mentioned. Roseanne Barr mentioned him during a good nights. So even there, he snuck on. And but I don't think he hung out at the office or the studio. I think it was all like at restaurants or at their apartment, that kind of stuff. Because he would throw parties, and a lot of these people would come. I mean, cast members, writers. So it was a good invitation to get. If you got an invite to a Michael O'Donoghue party, I know I got a couple myself. It was really something. First time I went, I was in awe. I just was like, "Oh my God, there's James Taylor. Oh my God, there's Chevy Chase. Oh my God." I'm like the starstruck kid. And Michael knew me, and he came over. I remember he put his arm around me. He goes, "So Dennis, what do you think?" And he was wearing this white dinner jacket and looking really great, just very elegant.
So after this final stint on SNL, Michael's last, I guess, phase of his career was a little different. He worked with Mitch Glazer more, correct?
Mm-hmm. unproduced screenplay after unproduced screenplay after unproduced screenplay. Yeah. Although they got one.
They got one.
They got Scrooged.
Yeah.
And they almost had another one called Arrive Alive. And it starred Willem Dafoe. And it was set in Miami. And Willem Dafoe, I believe, was playing like this really sleazy private investigator. It was like a crime comedy. And I think they started filming it, or they were in pre-production, and then nothing came of it.
Oh.
It's not one of their better scripts. But Scrooge, yeah, that took off. And Michael's has a cameo in it, plays a priest.
Yeah.
And Michael, of course, just hated what was done to it. Just he would visit the set. I wrote about this in my book, where Bill Murray does the big rant at the end of the movie about Christmas and how magical it is, and he does this, and Michael is like standing off camera, and they go cut, and Michael yells out, "What the fuck was that? The Jim Jones hour?" He goes, "I didn't write a word of that." And he didn't. That was largely improvised.
Yeah.
Michael did.
I told Mitch Glazer how I love that movie, and he looked at me and he's just like, "Okay." I do. I love that movie.
Me too.
Well, it's got its moments. It has its moments.
You can definitely see the Michael, again, fingerprints on like the idea of it and the character, especially in the beginning, that opening scene when they
the fake TV shows.
The fake TV shows is very Michael O'Donoghue.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and of course, Bill is doing a version of Lorne Michaels.
Right.
He's not doing the voice,
right?
But he's playing that kind of guy. Only much more cutthroat, if that's possible. So, he was very frustrated at the end of his life. Definitely. Very creatively frustrated. He got a through Bob Guccione Jr., he got a monthly column in Spin magazine called Not My Fault, where he recycled a bunch of his old stuff. I'm reading it like, I've seen this before. A couple of his things where he did something about Rwanda, which was really kind of almost heartbreaking. But yet, even in a piece on Rwanda, there were some funny lines in it, if you can believe it. But Spin magazine, I mean, it's a real come down. I wrote for Spin briefly. It wasn't Rolling Stone. It wasn't. It tried to be. They had some good writers in there again, but it didn't have any real cultural weight to it. And I know Guccione Jr. loved Michael and gave him a gig. Just said, write whatever you want, I'll publish it. And that's exactly what happened. But I asked Michael about that before he died, and I said, "Well, how's that Spin gig going?" He goes, he just like. He goes, "Man, I get nothing back on that." He goes, "I get paid, but nobody goes, hey, I saw your piece in Spin last month." Nobody does that because I don't know if anybody reads it. I go, "Well, I read it." He goes, "Well, Dennis, he knew how loyal I was and remain. I'll always be loyal to Mr. Mike. He was great for me. I miss him. And I was very, very lucky to be in that position. Very lucky. And I don't take it for granted. I'm starting to choke up a little bit. I'm sorry. I knew this would happen. If I talk about Michael at length, I get emotional. He was very good to me.
Well, you had a unique relationship with him.
Yeah, I did.
And you came, I mean, you met Michael later in his life, and you were much younger than him, right? So he was kind of, I mean, you looked up to him, and absolutely, it seems like he recognized that and appreciated it because you were so loyal and so you understood his comedy from the beginning. You've told us how you were watching this show in Indiana, and it just that kind of resonated with you from the start.
And he liked my writing too. Not just if I wrote about him, he liked that too. Although, I knew I knew if I fucked that up, man, that'd be it for me, but I didn't, thank God. But he liked my writing, just the stuff I wrote anyway. I mean, I wrote other things. I didn't always write about Saturday Night Live or even comedy. I wrote a lot. I wrote some political stuff. I had an op-ed in the Chicago Tribune. I did this thing for a while about the death of political comedy, which I beat into the ground, but people published it. So,
Yeah.
But Michael liked that stuff. He would read it and say, hey, I saw your piece in the Chicago Tribune or whatever. I thought it was really good. He's been gone for so long now. It's just, but the memory remains. And again, when I wrote when I got the gig, I was scared to death. I was going to fuck it up. And I interviewed everybody who would sit down for me. Not everybody would do that because of Bob Woodward's book on Belushi, Wired. And they felt burned by him.
Right.
But so I had this tremendous, as you said earlier, Gary, it was a heavy lift. And I threw out a wide net. And I was very respectful. I think I mentioned to you before when I first met Chevy, it was the interview for the book. And he insisted that I interview him at his lawyer's office in New York. And he wanted his lawyer to sit in on my interview. And the lawyer took out a tape recorder, put it next to mine, hit record when I hit record, because he was going to get, and then Chevy's sitting there and he's a big guy and he's really hostile to me at the beginning, kind of cold. But as I go along, as I'm interviewing him and as I'm mentioning certain things about the show and about his career and everything, he loosened up, became friendlier, more effusive. And then after the interview ended, he and I took a walk. It was on South Broadway, I think it was. Anyway, and he was really nice to me. And from that point on, and then when Mr. Mike came out, he was the first I heard from.
Oh. He
called me at home. He'd gotten the book like 48 hours earlier. He read it like almost in one sitting. He just poured through it.
Wow.
And I'll never forget that. He had my home number. This is back pre-cell phones, just a regular phone. And I had no caller ID. So I just pick up the phone and the first words I hear, "You are a fucking great writer." And I go, "Is this Chevy?" I kind of like, it sounds like he goes, "You're goddamn right it is." And then we talked for like 3 hours.
Wow.
He goes, "I love this about it. You got this right. You got that right." And it's because I put so much effort into it and I wanted to honor these people.
Right.
I wasn't out to trash them. I showed the blemishes too. It's not a hagiography, far from it, but it's respectful. And I like to think intelligent and insightful, I hope.
Right.
The last thing I think we just wanted to touch on briefly was when Michael did pass. He had been kind of out of the spotlight, if you will, for a decent amount of years. But just talk a little bit about just kind of the reaction that got and the tribute people had for him at that time, just remembering him and just like what it was like, what people had to say about him and just remembering him.
Well, the wake was it. I mean, it was all of his peers and the people he influenced. And again, I didn't know any of these people yet. And I didn't know the idea that I would write a book about Michael, One reason I was there is because Cheryl knew who I was. That was it, because I'd come over and had coffee with Michael. So she knew. I found out that he died on the Howard Stern show. I used to listen to Howard Stern every morning. And Robin Quivers, who was like his sidekick, and she did the news every morning. And she goes, "An original writer for Saturday Night Live died yesterday, Michael O'Donoghue." And I like dropped my coffee. I'm like, oh my God. I just talked to Michael 2 weeks before. We were going to go to a magazine party. It was a magazine called The Modern Review out of London, England. It was a pop culture monthly. And they tried to make a go of it in the States. And they had this huge party. And I got an invite to it. And I asked Michael to come. I said, well, let's go together. And he said yes. And then a couple of days before the party, he called me and says, Dennis, I really don't feel like going. I'm not feeling well. I just don't want to be around a lot of people. I said, well, then I'm not going, because if you're not going to go, I'm not going to go. So that was it. And we talked briefly, and that was the last time I talked to him. And 2 weeks later, he was dead. So I I mean, I was distraught because it came out of left field. He was only 54.
Yeah.
And at the wake, I mean, everybody, I mean, you really felt the love for him. And it was in his apartment, the great Winter Palace, which I'd been in many, many times before. And like I said, everybody, all the biggies got up and shared their memories. And Jane Curtin was there. She was there with Rosie. Again, I just looked at these people. I didn't know any of them. So I just,
right.
I had a beef eater and tonic, and I just sat in the corner and just like minding my own business, just happy just to be in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So, and little did I know, just a few months later, I got the gig. We're not talking even a year.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had an ex-girlfriend of mine say, well, you're going to write the O'Donoghue book, right? I go, what? I figured, I won't say his name. Well, he's dead now. So maybe Timothy White, who was an editor at Billboard magazine, but he wrote the first real big piece for Rolling Stone on Michael. And he and Michael were very good friends. He thought by divine right, he was going to get it. And when Cheryl gave it to me instead of him, I think they had a falling out or something. I don't know if it was a fuck you to him. I don't remember. He lost his shit with me because I went to speak to him and try to get his blessing.
Mm-hmm.
He yelled at me. He threw a fit. So it was no surprise years later I found he died of a heart attack in an elevator. So, he had a real trigger, but I thought he'd get it. So again, I was aggressive. I was ambitious. I wanted it. I didn't expect to get it, but somehow I did. And when I did, I did the best I could. I took it very, very seriously at the expense of a lot of relationships, including my marriage. So, but in the end, I think it was worth it. I really do. It still holds up. I hear from great humorists over the years who cite as one of their favorite books on comedy. And that really touches me, So, and these are big names too. So I'm really, I'm pleased. And Brad Robinson and Gary Seath, they like my stuff too.
I thought this was the end goal for you writing the book, was to be on a podcast 25 years later, right?
Before there were podcasts.
Before there were podcasts, you knew that this was the end goal.
But if only.
It's great because it's just somebody who I feel like has such an important voice, an important part of, not just Saturday Night Live, but comedy in general, especially Saturday Night Live. And I feel like over so many years is just like as we said in the beginning, either is misunderstood or forgotten or just isn't necessarily even given the credit. Like, again, I just don't think especially that first season of just how vital and how important he was to keeping what this show is now alive. Like, it could have been one and done. Could have been a one and done season.
Easily.
He's one of the very few people who are extremely responsible for that not happening.
Well, his peers certainly respected him and still respect him to this day.
Yeah.
And even the people he influenced, who are big, people who write for The Simpsons, for example.
Yeah.
Love Michael. And
I think, Dennis, your book and your work and your continued loyalty, like you said, to Michael, you have shown the layers, the depth that there was to Mike. He wasn't just all about death all the time. That's not what his humor was, right? Like, there were many layers to him. He was a complicated person.
Oh, that's putting it mildly, yes.
who did complicated work. Like, his work is not surface level. Like, there's deep humor in a lot of what he did. And you, for the last 20 whatever years, have shown that and brought that to light. And I think that's a credit to you and to your relationship with him.
Thank you.
That you've done that.
Thank you. Michael said that his comedy is like a cake. He goes, the icing is the comedy. The cake is the idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he took his work very seriously, even though sometimes he wrote stupid shit like Doggy Dentist and stuff like that. I don't know where he was going with that one, but
then he wrote stuff like Quarry, which is amazing. With Jane Curtin.
Yes.
Exactly. One of the few Michael pieces that Jane stars in. Yeah.
Dennis, this was great.
This is awesome, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I love you guys. I love your podcast.
Yeah. back at you. We love talking to you, and having, this time dedicated to Michael and just talking about him was very important to us, and we're glad we could make this work. So thank you for doing it with us.
Hey, my pleasure, man. Anytime.
The Not Ready for Primetime podcast is a Two Pints Productions production. Produced and edited by Brad and Gary. Thought about by Brad and Gary. Please rate and review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.